Good evening, everybody. Everyone knows someone with cerebral palsy. You just may not realize that you do. According to the cerebralpalsy.org, it is the most commonly diagnosed childhood motor disability in the United States today. United Cerebral Palsy Foundation cites that 3 out of 1,000 people have a cerebral palsy diagnosis. First, I'm going to tell you what cerebral palsy is. Second, I will talk about spastic cerebral palsy. And third, I will share with you what life can be like for a person diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Many people don't realize that cerebral palsy presents itself in many ways and degrees of severity. Cerebral palsy is medically defined by the National Center for Biotechnology Information as a group of disorders that involve brain and nervous system functions such as movement, hearing, learning, seeing, and thinking. Marion Stanton wrote a book in 2012 titled Understanding Cerebral Palsy, in which she cites 4 different types of cerebral palsy. The first is spastic, which involves damage to the cortex and is characterized by stiffness in the limbs. The second is agitoid, which is involved with damage to the basal ganglia and the cerebellum and is characterized with floppy limbs. The third is ataxic, which is damage to the cerebellum and is characterized with unsteady or random movements. And the fourth type is mixed, which is characterized with anything that does not fall under the top 3 categories. Cerebral palsy is caused by an injury or abnormality to the brain. It can occur in utero or up to the first 2 years of life, according to the National Center for Biotechnology Information. Risk factors are also involved, which include preterm birth and/or stroke, and up to 50% of cases are never determined, according to Marion Stanton. Now I will talk about spastic cerebral palsy, symptoms, and treatments associated with this form. Spastic cerebral palsy is the most commonly diagnosed type. Approximately 80% of cerebral palsy diagnoses are attributed to this form, according to the United States Center for Disease Control. Presenting symptoms include stiffness in one or more limbs, and the diagnoses are often done topographically, including quadriplegia, monoplegia, paraplegia, triplegia, and diplegia. Treatments for spastic cerebral palsy include specialists such as neurologists who verify diagnoses through MRI and CAT scans. There are also therapists such as physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech therapists. Self and home care is often done as well in conjunction with these therapies that include exercises, stretching, and yoga. I'm now going to share with you my daughter Sasha's journey with a cerebral palsy diagnosis. My daughter Sasha was diagnosed originally at age 1, and then that diagnosis was confirmed at age 3 through an MRI. Some of the symptoms that we saw with Sasha included when she was about 4 or 5 months and was holding toys, she would only hold them with her left hand. She would never grasp a toy with her right hand. Another symptom we also saw when she was about 6 months and started rolling over, she would only roll to one side. And then a third thing we noticed when she was about 10 or 11 months, she would hold a book in her hand, put it down to turn the page with that same hand. She wouldn't use her other hand to assist her. When we brought all these issues up to her pediatrician, they referred us to a specialist, and they said that she had a mild form of cerebral palsy and basically sent us on our way. We had no knowledge of what we were facing. Once the diagnosis was confirmed at age 3, we began to seek physical therapy with Sasha. We started doing about 2 or 3 months of physical therapy, and then they would send us home with homework to do home stretching, exercises. We also had leg braces prescribed, which she wore for day and night for active and static stretching. And then we also have had a lot of different things such as yoga we've done with her, and we continue to do with her. Sasha today is 8 years old, and she will continue to face this disability for the rest of her life. There is no magic cure, there is no magic thing that can make it go away. One of the things we may look to in the future with Sasha, she may end up having to have a surgery. The most commonly done one is on the Achilles tendon, which lengthens the tendon to facilitate in walking and running, because Sasha has had issues with tripping over herself often. Some of the things we also will be doing, we'll continue to do physical therapy with Sasha. We'll be going to the physical therapy this summer and do some more physical therapy with her as we continue to do home stretching as well. She also enrolls in sports, which helps a lot. We have her going into soccer this spring. Having a child diagnosed with cerebral palsy can be devastating initially, but knowing that it is the most commonly diagnosed childhood motor disability in the United States, it is likely that your friend, your family member, or your neighbor has a CP diagnosis. It is important to know about cerebral palsy so that if you encounter an individual with this disability, you are familiar with it. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Daniel.
Does it affect boys more than girls, or girls more boys, or is it 50-50?
There's no studies that show that it's either one over the other, so it's about equal. There's nothing, sometimes with autism it shows that the studies are saying that it affects boys more than girls, but there's nothing like that with cerebral palsy. It's pretty equal across the board. Anybody else?
Julie, what 25 years ago was diagnosed as like a floppy baby? Is that one of those?
It can be. There's other things that could be attributed to that, so it's not necessarily one is the cause for the other. But often, 25 years ago, they didn't diagnose. So you were just left with whatever you were left with. And now there's so much more they can do to help cerebral palsy patients. Anybody else? Yes, Erin.
If you don't do anything about it, does it get worse over time, or does it just kind of stay static?
It can get worse just because of the way the tendons shorten. So like with Sasha, had we not gotten her any of the help, it would have created shorter tendons. We would definitely be looking at surgery where, because we got help so soon, we now have the ability to avoid that surgery potentially. It doesn't mean it's a surefire thing, but the more help you get earlier, the better chance they have to continue, because Sasha will have to do stretches for the rest of her life. She will have to do that, or it will just go back to being an atrophied muscle use, because she doesn't process to think to use that muscle without, it's something between the brain and the muscles that's not firing together. So, any other questions? Jen?
I've heard that it can happen during the birthing process, but it sounds like it can also happen just when kids fall and hurt their head.
It
or hit their
depends,
head,
and it's generally like, there can be frontal cortex damage, but a lot of times brainstem. Sasha's stroke that she had in utero, actually you could see the damage to the back of her brain. And we were lucky because it didn't affect her cognitively, but it does affect things like, for instance, when she has a lot of choices to make and a decision to make, she goes into high pressure, her brain can't process through that, and so she tends to go into what I call meltdown, where we have to talk her down and teach her how to more appropriately, as she gets older, handle that. And so, but yeah, it can happen from an injury, a fall. If there was an abuse situation, it could definitely happen that way. And they may not know until, the thing with cerebral palsy, there's certain stages in the life stage that you may not actually know the answers about until later. So one of the things Sasha's pediatrician warned us about was, as she continued to grow, the possibility of speech issues, which she hasn't had, but in many cases they do, but you don't find that out till they're 5 or 6 or 7, right? Because they may be just normal progressive behavior till that age, so. Yeah.
If it was caused by a stroke in utero, are they more likely to have a stroke again later in life?
No, there's no evidence to support something like that. And there's no, like in Sasha's case, there was no reason for her, they don't know why she had a stroke in utero. There was nothing connecting that. Sometimes it can happen if there's an infection, or, but they really, and she wasn't preterm, so they really couldn't connect any dots that way. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. Okay.